My name is Buck Ferguson. I started at Microsoft in July of 1983. I left in June of 1994. And the primary role in the early years was development of the corporate campus. And once we went public, I was the primary contact for Wall Street in the investor relations role. I was born in Denver, Colorado, and lived there for 12 years. And then my father was in the radio business. Migrated from Denver to Seattle. I went to high school at Sammamish High School, which is only a few miles away from here. So I've been around this neck of the woods for a while. Sammamish was a small school. My sister was 2 years older, was in the first graduating class. I was in the third, and that was a long time ago. I wasn't sure I was going to go to college, and I had the good fortune of meeting a fellow when I was having knee surgery, and he said, look at a college, and it's a good place to go, and he would help me get a scholarship, which I needed. I went to Whittier College and enjoyed it, a small college in Southern California. And then from there, I went to Duke Law School and got my law degree. And at the time I graduated, and for about 6 to 8 years after that, I was the only person, there were two of us that had taken that route, Whittier to Duke. And of the two, I was the only one that had not been president of the United States. This was the path that Richard Nixon had. He went to Whittier and then he went to Duke. Well, I came back to Seattle, and my mother was still living here. And I went to work for a private firm and found that I preferred something different. I went to work for the prosecuting attorney's office. I prosecuted criminal cases, and then I was the lead attorney for the Kingdom when it was being built. And I was the second chair when we negotiated contracts with the Seahawks and the Mariners for long-term contracts. So sitting down with the ownership of the Nordstrom and then the owners of the original owners of the Seattle Mariners was quite an experience. I wanted to get out of the direct practice of law, and I wanted to do something that was a little bit in the law, but something else. I was really looking for opportunities with smaller companies that had interesting challenges. Microsoft moved back here in 1979. But its presence was there from the beginning because Bill and Paul were born and grew up here. I had two primary interviews for the job. The first was Steve Ballmer, and he was my boss for the first year, maybe longer. And the second one was with Bill, and I'll never forget that. It was scheduled for a half hour. He was at least 45 minutes late. It ran for an hour and a quarter, and I felt like I'd been wrung out. He was so intense and so focused, and you lost track of time, and you just got lost in the conversation. It was an amazing experience. So my first office was in the building right behind Burgermaster, and that was amazing. Of course, it was small. And I always thought it was such a kick that all of these young, talented programmers, they had speed dials to Burgermaster, and Burgermaster recognized what was going on and put a gate, so it was very easy access to go back and forth. And shortly after I moved into that office, I moved across the 520, and we started taking one building, and all of a sudden it was just growing exponentially. And we had to figure out mail service, and we had all these different things that were going on. That first office was a long way from where Bill and Paul had their first office in a bank building in downtown Bellevue. And if you see the picture of those people, you'd say, these bankers look at these people and say, I don't know. So it was clear that we needed a more space, and we wanted to consolidate the space. So my project pretty quickly became finding a new place to move. And it really wasn't about finding a new place to move. It was about creating a campus where we could all be together, collaborate, we could interact, we could just spend all of this time. And in searching for it, we looked at a lot of different sites. There were three criteria that stuck out in my mind. First, I wanted to make sure it fit our personality. I was 8 to 10 years older than most everybody I was around, so I might have had a little different personality. I was married with kids; they weren't all. Secondly, we wanted to have room to grow, and the third thing was we wanted to make it an interesting place where they would enjoy it. And so we looked at a lot of sites. The most interesting odd one was there was a developer who's still a major developer in downtown Seattle, and he invited us to look at the tallest building at that time, 67 stories. And he said, "I'll give you 3 elevator banks right over there. You can have it. You." And I very polite, and we enjoyed looking at it and everything. And I driving away with Carl Bates, who was also a key guy he and I made up the team that were doing all of this. We sort of laughed at each other and said, that's not the personality of anybody at Microsoft. So, but we found this site where it is now, and it was the land. It had gone through iterations of the land being gathered into one ownership. Started with the Catholic Church, and then it was sold to Eddie DiBartolo, a shopping center developer, and he had it cleared except for the 30 acres that we ended up taking, and he had roads and he had worked it out with Metro to get bus tracks and everything, and he needed one more permit from the county, a grading and use permit. He didn't get that permit, and so it just laid fallow. And so a couple of people built some spec buildings, and then we looked at it. So we focused on having the 30 acres in the woods, and we were going to have 4 buildings, and we were trying to figure out how we went about this. And very quickly, Carl and we there was a team we assembled, and the third key guy was a guy named David Victor. He worked for Wright Runstead Development, and he helped us with so many things, architects and everybody. And we got an architect, and we were describing what we needed. And the offices we needed, one of our great recruiting tools we thought at the time was everybody that came here from East Coast, they had their own office, they had an oak desk, and they had 2 or 3 of the latest computers. But a private office was just beyond belief, instead of being in some kind of bullpen setting at the time. So we went to the architects and were describing what we needed, and they came back with this star-shaped design. And it originally was just a star shape because it would maximize the number of windowed offices. And in designing that, there were no window frames, metal window frames on the market that were the size we needed. We needed them to be about 6 inches smaller than anyone was existed. So we were able to get the manufacturer to create the window frame. It turns out that we needed a lot of them over the next few years. But we did that. We changed the interior of the star, and then we went on. We built we built it out of a drive-it material. It's like a stucco, and it lasts a long time. In fact, I didn't expect it to last until this latest redo of the campus that started a few years ago. But it lasted 35 years. And as with everything at Microsoft, even then, we wanted to be into these buildings right away. And we were trying to figure out the fastest way to do it, and there was a different technique. And so the technique was you pour the parking place. It was open air parking underneath the building, and that was important because of the ventilation going through. You pour the first parking level, let that all cure, and then you pour another level right on top of it, and that was the roof. and you jacked it up to the roof. You repeated the process for the second floor, and then repeated this process for the first floor. So think of it like a stack of pancakes, and you had 4 pancakes, and they just went up a little ways, and that was how it worked. The other interesting thing about it was financing. And at the time, I think the company had $30 million in the bank, but Bill never wanted to own the buildings. And so we engaged in a sale and leaseback. We'd develop it and we'd sell it to somebody, and then we'd lease it back on some long-term basis. And there was a real estate developer in San Francisco, huge, and really one of the top 2 or 3 in the country, that invested in real estate. It did these sale and leasebacks, and we negotiated it for, I don't know how long, several months. We got ready to sign the deal. Frank Gaudette, the CFO at the time, my boss, and I and Carl went down for the signing of it, big signing thing. We got in the room, we had our pens out, and this other assistant walks in, the senior guy that we'd been dealing with. He said, "Geez, I'm really sorry, but the chairman says no." Right there at the last minute, he says no. And we looked at it, and he said, "We don't understand. Is there something wrong with the terms?" And he said, "No, he saw the word software." "What is software?" "Nobody's heard of software. We don't care about software. It's too risky. No, we're not going to do this deal." Meanwhile, we're marching along with all the construction. We needed to find somebody. So we went to a company in New York, which a lot of people, I'm sure, have heard of, called TIAA CREF. It was Teachers Insurance and Annuity Association. And they had, I don't know how many of the teachers in every school everywhere puts their money in there for retirement. And they had a real estate arm that invested. So we were able to work out an agreement with them. That was a type of an organization that gave new definition to risk-free. So they weren't going to allow anything. But we got them financed. Ironically, 5 years later, they were having real trouble with their real estate market. And they came to us to sell it back to us, which we bought at a discount. So at any rate, it all worked out well. In February of 1986, February 16th is when we moved to the new campus. But the more important event a few weeks later was going public. Went public in March 13th. That was really one of the most significant events of the company up until that point. Maybe some would argue a longer term. But the second most event was moving to the new campus. The campus was ready. And so I think Bill was never more nervous about something going on than he was the move to the new campus, because we were moving from where his office was over by the Burgomaster and all of these offices that were located around. And I think we started it on Thursday. And at the end of the day on Thursday, everybody had to turn it off. No computer on. And this meant all of the important computers that were processing all the data. And that made Bill nervous. Turning it all off and then waiting 4 days, is it going to come back on? So it was almost a flawless move. It was just so well organized, and we had good weather. And we moved in, and so by Monday, when they came to their office, they went to their office, turned it on, and everything worked. Just like they'd walked out, only it was a different place. It was absolutely wonderful. When I started, it was under 400. And then it seemed like the next week there were 700, and the next week there were 1,400, and it just kept growing. And there wasn't any end in sight, because all of the work that was being done will say, we're working on this product. Well, I have an idea for another product. And then there's another group that grows up. And that was the excitement. But it was clear that we needed to have more space. And that was one of the criteria, is to have room to grow. It was about creating a community where everybody could get together, collaborate. They could walk from one building to the next. And it was feel homey. In fact, it became your work home or your home at work. And in many of those days, it was really homey because some of the guys coming from the East Coast needed to have their dog in their office. Come full circle, maybe a little. But the idea, it just, when you say campus, then it suddenly took on a whole new meaning. It wasn't about buildings. It was about people all getting together for everything. They could have meals, they could go out and exercise, they could be back in their offices, they could drink their free soda pop. When I started, I think we only had 10 varieties of soda pop and no water. They could have all of that and be comfortable. So campus just seemed to be the right word that fit. Once it was finished, this was a first for a lot of our competitors and people in technology. But this was the first conceptual drawing, and we kept looking at it, and he said, boy, that really makes sense, especially since we got extra window. We thought with 4 buildings, we'd have space to grow for some time. And when we were moving in, I was talking with Bill, and he was saying, well, look at how much extra room we have. I said, well, we're going to have 15,000 feet that's not going to be occupied. Each floor of each building was 30,000 feet, so half of one floor. And he said, could we rent them? And I said, well, the projections, I don't know whether that'll work. And by the time I got back, we talked about it again days later. I said, no, we need that space for. So we had no idea that all the land was around. In fact, I have another photo, if I could show you, of the actual property. This is a great photo shows what it was like when the first 4 buildings were finished. You can see that the first 4 buildings are in woods, 30 acres of woods. Probably within 6-8 months, we knew we needed more. And so we planned out these modules. So buildings 5, 6, and 7 are doubles, if you will. And we had, and we went pretty quickly to that. John Shirley was the president. He started the same week I did, or I started the same week he did. And he was so good in so many ways. And we went to him and said, we just finished these first 4 buildings. We could build 2 more buildings. It'd be really cost efficient. And he looked at it and he said, no, I don't want to be that cost efficient. If I have empty buildings, people are going to want to fill them. And so headcount was the key, and so we had to manage that carefully, and that's what he did. So we went to the next several buildings. We bought more land. I can't remember when we finally bought it all, but we realized the direction it was going, and we did. We were so proud of it that at a company meeting, one of the things we unveiled was a street sign, which City of Redmond was more than happy to help us with, that said "One Microsoft Way." So it was great fun. We had fields out there, soccer fields, softball fields, and you drove in and you say, oh, I feel good about working in a park. I feel good about working in this office. I feel good about we had cafeterias everywhere. I feel good about being here. And of course that translated into more hours here, which everybody liked. And that helped the company. I haven't come over for a long time. And I drove around and I was just astounded at what a great job, fabulous this new campus is. It took our concept of campus and our buildings and just made it so much better. We thought it was great then, but this is a whole new definition of the way the campus is now. And it makes people, anybody around here, feeling proud. The story of the relationship with Redmond, they were just fabulous, just absolutely fabulous to deal with. They didn't quite understand anything we were doing, but we were an economic engine that was coming to their neighborhood. The flip side was Bellevue, who really didn't want us, didn't like us. And I have to tell you one thing, just to show how it was going. As the campus was developing, the city manager of Bellevue came to me and said, we don't like all of your employees driving into the city through our streets and our neighborhoods. They're clogging them up and all. So unless you redirect them, we're going to put up barricades. So they're going to have a harder time to get into it. And I said, are you serious? And so then we went back and we did some studies. And then I went back to him and I said, do you know that probably 60% or more of our employees live in Bellevue? And where do you think they spend their money? Where do you think they go shopping? Well, that settled that disagreement. But Redmond was, back to your main question, Redmond, everything was trying to figure out where they were going in the region. There wasn't, to give you the sense, when Microsoft moved back from Albuquerque to Seattle, there were two software firms in the state. One was Boeing Computer Services, giant. And then there was Microsoft. And we know how quickly, the years after that, all of a sudden, it was like an amoeba. You had people from Microsoft going off with new ideas, and software firms were everywhere. But there were only two at the time. So that all started more of an economic energy. When the campus was completed and it was time to move on to something else, we'd gone public, and I was given the responsibility for investor relations. Now, I didn't grow up in finance, and I generally understood investor, but investor relations at that time was somebody from the company communicating with Wall Street. And communicating with Wall Street means all of these different investment funds that are invested in Microsoft. And so that was my role. I had some exchanges with the president of the New York Stock Exchange, who was this was before we went public. He was so serious about getting Microsoft to list on the exchange. And when I was back in New York one time, he took me down to the floor and we walked around. We meet the traders here and everything. And he said, you've really got to list on it. Your access to more money and everything. And again, I walked back and thought, this isn't a company that needs capital. And the newer companies, if you will, were on NASDAQ. So it's a difference of four tickers, four-letter symbols versus 3 letters. NASDAQ was a newer, younger, more startup, more tech, if you will, oriented place. And there were people that were making decisions here that if somebody said, well, you need to go to the New York Stock Exchange for prestige because you need capital, that was an instant turnoff. Microsoft did not need, it's not to be arrogant, but they did not need so many of the extra things that something like the New York Stock Exchange. And the New York Stock Exchange was old and established and everything, and that was part of the problem. Needed to have something newer and fresher. And one of the things when we went on the S&P 500 and we had a dividend, we were the first company to have a dividend, the first tech company to have a dividend. So we got more investors. It was fun, and of course, the company couldn't stop beating itself every quarter for results, and the stock price went up. They'd have splits. Everything was very, very exciting. The concept of owning stock was new because these people were young and gifted in what they were doing. But they hadn't been investing, and they hadn't had money to invest or anything. So when it went public, it was beyond belief exciting. When I drive around here and I see these beautiful buildings, I see everything is done so well and so much attention to all the detail, that makes me feel really good. And it's not about anything I did. It's something that happened that just builds it for every generation. I mean, every year new employees come, and we created something that made it better to do what they're doing, and that was our goal: is to make it a better place for them to be creative. So all of the other stuff, they didn't have to worry about LAs. They just felt good about being a part of the Microsoft community. And that still is a very, very strong feeling with me. When I worked at Microsoft, I had young children, and I had a boy and twin girls, and I spent a lot of time at Microsoft. So I wanted to catch up time with them, and I got involved in their activities, Little League sports, and not Little League sports, but youth sports, soccer and baseball and things like that, and spent a lot of time doing that. And then one of my good friends at Microsoft was really interested in owning a baseball team. Chris Larson, amazing guy in his own right. And he put together a group of us from Microsoft, there are 7, that became part of the partnership that owns the Seattle Mariners. Yeah, and that again was another exciting chapter. Chris has been an absolutely amazing partner in leading so many things that are important to keeping baseball in Seattle. So there were 7 of us, and we keep motoring ahead. But it's an exhilarating experience, and it's so different. It's a different type of business. This group has been together 32 years. There have been only a couple people, only one person's left, one person's passed away, and we've added a couple new owners. But we're probably the most stable ownership of any Major League Baseball team that there is. And these people I work with side by side here at Microsoft, I sit with them regularly at owners' meetings, and they're incredible people and still doing their same thing, but in a different way, because we have the people that know baseball running baseball.